Recording there.
Nice. Amazing. Well, thank you again, Stacy, Alexis, all the incredible librarians who are making all of these extraordinary, accessible sessions available on Zoom this summer. So hats off for pivoting so graciously in a time of COVID. And without further ado, let's talk about garlic. So perhaps just a couple little details of housekeeping. If you're joining us and would love to jump on mute, that would be wonderful so we all can hear beautifully. And I always love it when I can actually see everybody. So if you feel comfortable being on video rather than, being just a black screen, we are a community and a huge family. So thank you for being part of our family today. And yeah, so I'm Petra Page-Mann. I grew up in my father's garden 10 miles that way. And I grew up growing garlic, and we would harvest garlic, and every summer it was one of my favorite things to pull the garlic out of the ground. And honestly, I don't remember it being especially large. I remember being like, yeah, it's about as big as we find it at the grocery store. And which I didn't think much of, and I was really proud of. And then it turns out, lo and behold, I start working on organic farms. And now I go into grocery stores and I'm like, what? You call that garlic? This is a small bulb of garlic for us. So I have learned how to grow much larger, much more healthy, happy garlic. And I'm really grateful to share all of this information for you, friends. So without further ado, I want to share just a couple other ways that you can access our Fruition Seeds resources. And then we're going to dive right into the 7 steps to growing awesome garlic. So without further ado, know that we made this sweet little fact sheet for you. And so check it out. And we'll send in the follow-up email. You'll have access to the PDF. So it's a sweet little, it's 4 pages, and there's types of garlic, tips for growing in the fall, what to do in the spring, what to do in the summer, how to harvest and cure it. So it's all this awesome info. So definitely watch your inbox for the replay and for that access to that. And then 2, this is just a tiny taste in the bucket of what we share in our online. We have all these online courses, and the vast majority of them are for free. And so we have a whole garlic and shallot growing academy that's literally hours and hours of video tutorials, and they're beautifully organized step by step, season by season. So this is just a brief little distillation for you today. So I hope that you dive into those resources that you'll have access to, honestly, for the rest of your life. So whether you've gardened for 50 years or you're just about to plant your first garlic ever, let's dive in. So here are just the laundry list of what we're going to talk about today. The 7 steps that we're going to talk about: right stock, right site. We're going to talk about right timing, right planting, mulching, weeding, feeding, and harvest curing. And we're going to really focus on the first 5 of those steps, everything that you'll be doing this fall to set yourself up for success. And then we'll dive into what to expect on the horizon of seasons to come. And Stacy of the Macedon Library is fabulous, and she'll be checking in on the chat too. So anytime you have questions, don't hesitate to ask them, especially if they're clarifying questions. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, you are not the only one. So be sure that you are fully just leaning into Stacy, and she'll call out all the questions. So after each of those sections, we'll have a little Q&A, and then we'll dive into the next session. And with any luck at the end, we'll have some extra time for Q&A as well. So without further ado, let's talk about the right planting stock. So people often ask me if they can plant garlic from the grocery store. And here's the thing. In the grocery store, that's food grade garlic. This is seed grade garlic. This is class A. Food grade is actually class B. It's generally much smaller. It can actually potentially have some diseases or nematodes in it that is no big deal in terms of the eating quality of it. But if you planted that, that would be really sad to say the very least. So it's counterintuitive, and I won't stop you. You can technically, of course, plant the garlic that you see in a grocery store, but it makes a really big difference to get really good high quality stock, because you want the biggest bulbs you can find too. There's a direct relationship between the size of the bulb and the size of that you plant and the size of the bulb that you'll harvest. And so it's really important that, I mean, seed garlic is expensive for a good reason. There's only so much cream of the crop. But when you start with this, you can go to this. You can't start from this and go to this. So it's all incremental. And starting with the best stock you have you can find is the very best way to grow the very best garlic. And here at Fruition Seeds, I'm actually sitting in front of our garlic field for 2021. And we're going to plant about 15,000 cloves of garlic this year, along with shallots as well. And we love to share them with you. Actually, now over 95% of our crop is large enough so that it's seed grade. So everything else that I'm about to share with you about finding the right place to grow your garlic and taking care of your soil and how to plant and the timing, all of those factors make a really big difference. But the single biggest factor is simply, yes, having that garlic that is a huge, beautiful bulb of garlic. And we'd love to share ours at fruitionseeds.com. And so once you have good quality stock, that makes all the difference. And now let's talk about right site. Where are you going to plant your garlic? And before we jump into that right site, Stacy, were there any questions in that, what the planting stock kind of continuum is?
No questions, but there was
Amazing.
a comment from someone who said that she had watched your what you can plant in the fall video and managed to plant lettuce, span peas, turnips, and cilantro. So
that's amazing. Yes, you will be so happy you did for years to come.
We just got a question. Robert asks, hard neck, soft neck?
Yes, let's talk. So oh my gosh, this is where there's so much more detail in the Garlic Academy on our website. So jump on in, because let's talk hard neck, soft neck. So hard necks are way more cold hardy than soft neck, generally speaking. That's what I grew up knowing, understanding. Turns out, so we have a soft neck variety that's amazing called Regatuso that's super well adapted. It's been growing here in the Geneseo Valley, actually. The Regatuso family in Geneseo brought it from Sicily in the late 1800s and has been growing it in the Geneseo Valley ever since. And so it is without question the most cold hardy soft neck we've ever seen. At this moment, we have sold out of it for 2020. And I look really forward to growing a whole lot more of it so that we can share it with you. But so otherwise, stick with your hard neck garlics, unless you're getting a soft neck from us or from someone who has also been growing soft neck successfully in short seasons. Now, there's so many more distinctions also between garlic types. So there's 6 different DNA types of garlic. And so there's the porcelains and the artichokes and the silver skins, and there's lots of different types. And so I go into that at length in the Garlic Academy. So if that's of interest, dive in. And without question, if you're interested in the medicinal qualities, you want the porcelain types. And they honestly all have a little different flavor profile. And we talk about this. We talk about this on each of our varieties on our website. And every year we have an annual garlic tasting. We were going to do it publicly this year, and then COVID-19. But we still had our internal fruition team garlic tasting. And every year we taste every single one of our garlic varieties. And we actually taste them side by side, because here's the thing. Especially if you're here in the Northeast or in the Pacific Northwest or in Michigan with so many apples, an apple is not an apple is not an apple. And you probably know that you can very articulately describe why you prefer a Cortland over a Macintosh, over a Gala, over a Red Delicious, or whatever it is that you prefer. There's no right and there's no wrong. It's just what you love. but so garlic is similar. There are some are very, I think of it like juice and wine. You know, juice has that same flavor profile from the front to the finish, if you will. And I don't know anything about wine, so I don't want to make myself come off any other way besides a country girl that loves garlic. But wine, on the other hand, the flavor really changes from front to finish. So some garlic, honestly, has a lot of that same flavor profile from the beginning to the end, and some has way more nuance. And some, of course, is really strong and pungent spicy. Some is super sulfury, some is just super hot, and some are, honestly, our Regetuso, that soft neck, is incredibly floral. So there's a great deal of diversity in garlic and between the different types. So I highly recommend getting as many different types as you possibly can. And we're actually about to get, we have some friends in Montana that have some garlic that's about to arrive. So if you wait like 4 or 5 days, hopefully, by next week, we'll have 2 more varieties of garlic to share with you, in addition to the music and the German white that we have on there now, and as well as elephant garlic. So elephant garlic, I also grew up thinking we can't grow here. And generally speaking, just like soft necks, it's a risk. But if you get regionally adapted strains, that goes a long, long way. And so this particular elephant garlic that we share has been we have some Mennonite friends in Amish country in southeastern Pennsylvania, and they've been adapting it. And so we've started growing that, and it's really easy and just amazing to grow. So by next week, we'll have elephant on our garlic on our website back again too. And I did want to mention also, everything that I'm sharing about garlic is the same for shallots that are super easy to grow. And you plant 1 shallot and you'll get 25, 30 shallots if your soil is glorious and your plants are really happy. So they're incredibly productive, and they just store so long. Like literally, I have some shallots on our kitchen counter that are just sitting there from last summer that I'm just kind of waiting for them to get soft. They're still rock hard. So these Dutch red shallots are pretty remarkable. Let me count the ways. So yeah, and now let's talk about the right site. And this makes such a big difference. Certainly starting with amazing garlic stock. Nothing can make up for that. But you can plant huge, beautiful, healthy, organic garlic in substandard soil, and it won't be huge, beautiful garlic that you harvest. So let's talk. Right site. This looks like full sun. Garlic needs all of the energy it can get, all of the sun that it can get. So make sure that your site has full sun. Make sure garlic is well drained. Garlic is really sensitive to if there's too much moisture in the soil. Plants that are not used to living in the water literally kind of drown in too wet of soil. So you want to make sure that your site is really well drained. And additionally, let's talk about fertility. And so there's a few things to keep in mind. If you haven't already gotten a soil test, go ahead and get a soil test. Fall is the perfect time. Most people think to do soil testing in the spring, which means that you not only have it often takes you 2 months to get your soil test back because everyone is sending in their soil test, and then you have to instantly turn on a dime and transform your soil. What I love about fall testing of soil is that we often get our soil test back within 2 weeks. Sometimes it's even 10 days. And then you can have all fall to amend and adjust your soil, all winter, all spring before, so you have plenty of time to kind of make adjustments and make those changes. So now, honestly, is a perfect time, and we have a great blog at Fruition Seeds of how to test your soil. So if you just simply Google search Fruition Seeds blog soil test, you'll get a really super easy, step-by-step how we do it, how you can do it. It's awesome. And I always think of soil testing as snorkeling, where you can be on the Great Barrier Reef on a pontoon boat with a margarita, and you can say that you're at the Great Barrier Reef. But if you didn't have your snorkel and you weren't in the water, there's a lot going on that you probably missed. And the same is true for soil testing. And if you aren't soil testing, you're on a pontoon boat, you've got your margarita, but you don't have your snorkel. So it's just an amazing tool to actually be where you are and be able to see patterns and adjust. And so now once you make sure that, and so garlic, anywhere 6.2 to 6.4 pH is the ideal for any garden vegetable, for most garden vegetables, garlic included. And then the richer the soil, the better. So the thing about garlic, it is a heavy feeder more than many other things in your garden. So there's a direct relationship between the quality of nutrients and quantity of nutrients that this garlic has compared to what you'll harvest. So a few things. We put on like a few inches of compost on every single one of our beds. So we don't skimp in the garlic and the compost department. So we're preparing our soil now. We're working that compost in. We also have, and perhaps you've seen, we make this garlic and shallot fertilizer. And my partner, Matthew, is amazing and hilarious, and he loves soil. I love him a lot. And one of the things that he loves to do is create, just like play with amendments and dial in fertility, because a root vegetable has really different needs than, say, a leafy and fruiting vegetable. And so these are particular nutrients. Here, I'll open up a bag because it's slow release and also longer term release, short and long term, because here's the thing. Your garlic, you want it to be growing in the fall, but mostly roots underground. The leaves coming up aren't the worst thing in the world, but they, to some degree, just the less they can invest in leaves and the more they can invest in roots, the better. And so this is really well, I mean, oh my gosh, it has all kinds of exciting things like alfalfa meal and blood meal, bone meal, and perhaps you can see the larger orangish chunks. There's actually pieces of like crab shell and lobster shell in there. So it's really beautifully, those will break down over the years as well, but certainly in spring that'll be feeding your garlic. And so there's all kinds of nutrients in here for both fall and spring, so that your garlic will be able to focus on its roots in the fall, and then in spring, then the nitrogen will be like, oh hey, you want to make leaves? Let's make leaves. So can you grow garlic without this? Of course. Does this make dialing in the fertility super easy? Yes. So one bag is perfect for 1 pound of the garlic, or about 6 cloves, 6 bulbs, depending on, of course, some of our bulbs are larger than others. But yeah, those are some keys for preparing your site and working that fertility, whether it's compost, whether it's this fertilizer. Hey, and if you happen to have, our granular fertilizer on hand too, that's just our general fertilizer, add that in too. Honestly, it doesn't hurt, and the more the merrier. So Stacy, were there any questions in that little section on siting?
Yeah, Linda would like to know if you could touch on the possibility of planting garlic in containers.
Ooh, yes. So I never recommend growing garlic in containers, Linda. The exceptions are like raised beds are kind of containers. Raised beds are fine. And if you have more than a 15-gallon container, you've got options. But here's the thing. Generally, containers get more cold than the soil. And containers also, especially if they're porous, like we have a lot of these containers that are like, recycled plastic water bottles woven into a fabric, which is awesome. But that means winter winds blow through that fabric and can desiccate garlic. And so garlic really doesn't die from cold, especially hardneck garlic. It takes a lot to kill garlic. But if it dries out, that's its weak link. And so because the containers tend to dry out over the winter, that's where growing garlic can become a real trick in containers. So I never recommend it unless it's a massive container. And also containers, it's just hard to get the fertility to really impressive levels. So especially because garlic is such a heavy feeder. I don't often recommend it, but if you have massive containers and are totally dialing in your fertility, you can always give it a try.
The next question is from Lynette. She planted garlic last year and wonders if she can use the bulbs she saved to plant this year.
Yes. Oh my gosh, Annette, I hope that you do. Yes. So when you're saving seed of garlic is so easy. That being said, you want to make sure that you are only saving like the cream of the crop, i.e. the very most biggest, beautiful bulbs that you grow that you want to eat most. You must resist. And that is your planting stock. Otherwise your garlic will consistently get smaller and smaller every year. If you consistently are resisting that urge to eat your most beautiful garlic, then you'll consistently have more bigger and bigger garlic as the years go by. Also though, if you see that maybe your garlic is starting to, like not look there's like mold on the outside of the cloves. If it doesn't look absolutely picture perfect, then just go ahead and eat them. They'll be fine to eat, but you just want to make sure that, this is not only your next generation, this could be 10,000 generations to come. So you just want to make sure, and this is something we do every day at Fruition Seeds, this is not just a seed we're sharing with you. These are seeds that are the foundation of every generation yet to come. And so that is such a privilege. That is such a responsibility. And so just make sure that you're really showing up for that responsibility and planting the biggest and the best. But yeah, if you're taking good care of your garlic, there's no reason that you won't be, there's no reason that you can buy garlic from us this year and never buy garlic from us ever again. So yes, I hope that you save all of the seed and share it with people you love too.
Next question is from Deborah. Can you plant garlic next to a lavender plant?
Can we plant garlic next to a lavender plant? There's not a lot of great reasons to not, but there also aren't a lot of great reasons to plant them there. And here's the thing, and I'm glad you mentioned, I'll jump in a little early on companion planting with garlic. Garlic is just kind of a unique crop. It's planted in fall. Generally, we mulch it a ton, and then we harvest it in the middle of July. And so it has a really different seasonal cycle. Garlic and shallots have a really different seasonal cycle than the vast majority of other plants in our gardens. And so we tend to grow them kind of in their own sections so that we can manage them more specifically. If you're just growing a couple different bulbs and are just wanting to throw some cloves in and have fun, amazing. I won't stop you. They'll probably enjoy each other's company. But if you're wanting to plant more than like 10 or 20 garlic cloves, I think you're probably making more work for yourself. Would be the main liability there. But here is the companion planting that I do recommend with garlic without reservation. So I love to eat greens over the winter. And so I will plant, and we'll get to this proper spacing between garlic very soon. We plant anywhere between 6 and 8 inches between your garlic, kind of in a grid. And so we'll pretend that these bulbs are actually cloves. And so there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, and in the middle, right? Like on a die, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 in the middle. In the middle of those 4 garlic bulbs, I'll plant a transplant of spinach. I'll plant a transplant of mosh, of claytonia, of something that is really cold hardy, that's going to sit there and be delicious and also not mind growing in the cold. So I'll eat it in the fall, I'll eat it in the winter, I'll eat it in the spring, those green leaves. And then by the time May comes and those greens are really fully going to seed, sending up their seed stalks and becoming bitter, I've eaten a ton of salads from intermixed in my garlic beds, and at that point they're not competing with the garlic isn't competing with those greens. So that's how I interplant my garlic, and I'm so glad that you asked.
Oh, that was a interesting question. The next question is, what is the recommended pH?
Anywhere between 6.2 to 6.4 is fabulous for garlic, which is true for the vast majority of your garden vegetables.
And I think this question goes well with that one, sort of. What is the ratio of fertilizer that's best?
Yeah, so it's kind of, so you want to go like kind of 4-5-4 of the NPK. And it's tricky because a lot of fertilizers that just have that NPK doesn't tell you about long versus slow release. So that's where our organic garlic and shallot fertilizer is nice, because it's not just often foliar feeds and that like NPK is like, okay, immediately available for the plants. So it's really, really important that, yeah, you find ways to kind of make it less nitrogen available in the fall and more nitrogen available in the spring are the main things to dial in.
Alyssa wonders, so she has a garden that tends to flood if the spring is wet. Should she avoid planting in this garden?
Yes, if you have a garden bed that is wet in the spring, I would definitely avoid planting garlic in that bed. Wet soil is just really hard for garlic to grow in. And sometimes people ask, if less hours of direct sunlight is better than wet soil. And honestly, I would take slightly less sun and fully well-drained soil over the two. And hopefully you won't have to choose.
Anne Marie wants to know, do you need to move your garlic field every year? We were once told that garlic fields needed to be on a 4-year rotation.
Oh, yes. Garlic, you want to grow in a different place every year. And rotations, honestly, on a small scale, I generally just invite people to consider it a great exercise for a home scale, but not necessarily a deal breaker. At like farming, when you're growing 14,000 bulbs of garlic, like we're about to, whoa, we have a 24-acre farm, and we have yet to grow garlic in the same place in the last 8 years. Like, we just don't mess around with our rotations because it's just not worth it. Like, literally, if you get a white rot, and often when garlic finally gets that soil-borne disease from having it accumulate in the soil, you can't grow there for 20 years. And so we're just trying to, avoid all of those headaches and heartaches, cut them off at the pass, knowing that, there's always things there's no way to prevent all the heartache. But yeah, and also people ask about rotations in terms of, and like our friend Rami just asked, will there be a problem, if you plant your garlic where you have a long row of tomatoes that had late blight? And late blight is actually just airborne. It's not soil-borne at all. And so it doesn't persist in the soil, which is great news. So not only you can actually plant your tomatoes right where you planted your tomatoes last year. There might be other reasons why not to, but it won't get late blight. I mean, if it does, it's because the spore just happened to be wafted up from Alabama and happened to land on that leaf, but not because it was actually in the soil. So yeah, and certainly that late blight isn't going to be transferring to your garlic. So great question.
Krista wants to know, what is good to use for mulch?
What is great to use for mulch? Actually, we have a whole mulching section, so maybe I'll hold off until we get to the mulch. First, we're going to talk about the timing, when to plant garlic, and then how to plant garlic, and then we'll talk about mulch. So I hate to put you off any more moments, but we'll totally get there. Any other questions on the site?
I think we're all caught up with the questions.
Cool. So now let's dive into the timing. So here I want to just lead with, we're always learning. We being all of us, but me at the top of the list. I am always learning things. And one of the things that I've really learned this year, and I've been planting things at garlic at different times. And our dear friend John Hunt in Branchport here in the Finger Lakes has been experimenting, and we had different hypotheses and experimenting on our farm, and I agree with John. So I'm actually changing what I generally tell people about planting. For years, I've told people to plant in between Halloween and Thanksgiving, and not to plant too early, because if you have those green leaves that grow too large, they can act like straws and suck up moisture from that clove, and just that those desiccating winter winds can dry out the clove more quickly if the clove is attached to the soil through this thing called a leaf. So that's been my theory, which I think is true. But John has proven that if you have like 6 inches of mulch, that you don't need to worry about the leaves being large, that they will persist, and that if they can grow more in the fall and establish more of a root system in the fall, suddenly they grow more quickly and have more access to more nutrients first thing in the spring. And so I've been telling people for years that to plant anytime between Halloween and Thanksgiving. And friends, I want to stand and sit, as the case may be, but for you, humbled to share that we're changing it up, and we're always changing it up, but we're really changing it up. We're planting in just a few weeks here. We're going to be planting, depends on the weather, but anywhere from late September to early October. And then as the earlier side, especially if you can give them 6 inches of mulch, which we'll get to very soon, and talking about dialing in mulch. And then kind of the end point, you can honestly plant garlic up until that garlic is frozen, and you can't put a trowel in the soil to move soil aside to plant a clove of garlic. At that point, the garlic it's too late to plant. So you can literally plant garlic super late. I've even planted, actually, speaking of Geneseo, again, I have some great friends in Geneseo that I was helping them plant some garlic in the middle of January. They hadn't planted it yet, and we had had all the snow, but then the snow melted and it was just warm enough, and the soil ever so defrosted a little bit. And they were like, Petra, can you help us plant garlic? And so I went and we planted garlic, and their garlic was still beautiful that next year. So I think that like mid to late January time here in Zone 5 is the cutoff point for actually planting your garlic. But I recommend planting it on the earlier side, so you can let those beautiful roots begin to extend into the soil and really get that foundation in the fall, so that they can really go for it in the spring. So that's on timing. And should we dive right into planting tips? Were there any questions on timing, Stacy?
No.
Cool. So when it comes to planting, there's a few different considerations: clove depth, clove orientation, and then just spacing. So clove depth depends on the mulching. So if you're going to mulch at least 6 inches, or about 6 inches, honestly, you only have to plant a clove 1 inch deep. If you only have like a scant inch of mulch, or maybe there's no mulch at all, go for 3, if not 4 inches. Plant them deeper. You can even go deeper, honestly. Deeper, err on the side of depth rather than lack of depth. And you'll want to go in and, here I am. Let me not get ahead of myself, because what you're planting, if you plant a bulb, you're going to be very disappointed with yourself next year, because each of these cloves are going to turn into a bulb. And if you let them just grow next to each other, just like their arrangement in the clove, you're going to get a ton of really small stressed bulbs. But so right before, keep them in the bulb until you're ready to plant. And then you'll break them apart. And it's okay, like if you have the wrapper on it, perfect. If some of the wrappers come off, that's fine. You just want to make sure that you're planting it ASAP, which is why I recommend planting that clove or breaking that clove apart just before you plant. And with something like a hardneck, you're going to see that there's the hardneck in the middle, right? And with that hardneck, you have just a single ring of cloves around that hard neck. And each of those cloves is going to be large. And here, I brought, where did I put it? Oh, I might have lost it in the mix. Oh, there it is. Yes. I brought a soft neck. See, there's no quite soft neck in there. And so let's open this up. Ooh, this is so well shrink wrapped. This is going to take a minute. But you'll see with soft necks, part of their thing is that there is this outer ring of very large cloves, just like the hard neck. But then there's an inner ring of much smaller cloves. And sometimes if those are large, go ahead and plant those. If they're small, don't bother planting them because they're not going to grow large. So one of the reasons that I love this Regetuso, this soft neck, is that the cloves in the inner ring are just really large. So you can see here's one of those outer rings, beautiful cloves, nice and large. And here's another, and then that inner ring. Oh my gosh, they're so beautiful. This inner ring. Oh my gosh, this is just two. So here's that inner ring, and I can break it into two. And I mean, that's awesome. So just be sure with, sometimes you'll find with silver skins, and depending on the variety, and you'll see like from the grocery store, right? I mean, I can't remember the last time I got garlic from a grocery store, but it's generally the silver skin variety because it has the longest shelf life because it's the most sulfurous, which also means it has the least flavor, kind of depth and nuance. But those silver skins are soft neck, and they have one at the larger cloves on the outer ring. The inner cloves are often just like little slivers, like little apostrophes. So that's another reason why we love Regetuso. So yeah, and then orientation. So you can see in garlic, there is, it's really obvious which is up and which is down when it's a bulb. And there's the root. And the apical bud, that growth point, is attached to that root plate, it's called. So you want to be sure that when you're planting the clove, that you're planting that root plate down and the tip up. And that's pretty critical. If it's upside down, it's going to grow. It's going to go like this. But then when you harvest it next year, it's going to be kind of messed up, and it's not going to cure. It's not going to store as well. So not the end of the world, but a super easy and really common mistake to make and not make now that you know. So yeah, make sure that the root plate is down. And then spacing. You want to plant garlic 6 inches away from other garlic in the row and between rows. So think of it as a 6-inch kind of grid. On our raised beds here that we make in this, not in raised beds, think like wooden planks and like a raised bed, but we just kind of take the pathway soil and bring it up into the bed. So we have these lovely mounds. And so we get we'll plant 3 of the 3 rows on a bed. And you can either, and then we have them like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, so that we can come in this way and this way with a hoe and do any additional, whether it's weeding or raking or feeding, any of those things, which if you're, doing a ton of mulching, you don't need to worry about as much. But yeah, 6 to 8 inches, a grid is perfect for spacing. Any questions about the spacing, Tracy? I do mean Stacy.
Robert says he lives in Houston. Is there a temperature concern when you're planting? Because they're still in the 90s.
Oh, yes. So actually, I highly recommend reaching out to your local cooperative extension, my friend, because garlic is trickier to grow in southern climates. It just doesn't get as large generally. Garlic loves growing in colder climates. It's originally coming from the steppes of like Eurasia. And so unlike Uzbekistan, the like center of diversity for garlic. So it loves growing in the cold. My friends in the Dominican Republic are like, they're so jealous of our garlic, and they grow garlic, but it's like super small because it just doesn't have the differentiation. Oh, so maybe this is a fun little thing to lift up. So how does a clove turn into a bulb? it's the function of the cold. And so it's essentially the cold forcing that single apical bud deep within this clove that's attached to this root plate. It's making that growth point splinter. And it's essentially hedging its bets. That garlic, if I might project on garlic psychology, is like, it's really cold. That's kind of stressful. I might die. How about if I break myself into 5 pieces, into 10 pieces, then at least one, maybe some will have a better chance of surviving. So welcome to garlic psychology. And that's how one clove differentiates and becomes 5 or 10 cloves surrounding a single bulb. And so the reason that that garlic is challenging to grow in warm climates is simply that it doesn't have the cold to let that cold really sink into the bones of the garlic to differentiate the cloves, and then help them grow larger, more vigorously. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. So honestly, I don't know anything about growing in Houston. And I know for sure that you would probably be planting it way later than we would, probably December, if not January. But reach out to your cooperative extension that you have regionally, and they have tons of great information, and it's totally their job to help share this information with you. So don't be shy. Yeah.
I feel like Alyssa's question might be related to what you were just talking about. So she says sometimes her garlic has seemed to form a bulb halfway up the stalk by springtime. Why is that?
Yes. So when your garlic stalk is forming and there's like little bulbils, so often that's in soft neck varieties, especially. But it's basically garlic. So garlic is interesting, right? It doesn't make seeds. There actually are some garlic, the purple stripe types, that do make seeds once in a while. It's super rare. But garlic is largely just vegetatively, clonally propagated. And so there are advantages and disadvantages to that. But without getting into too many details, garlic is like, how about I still try to procreate and make more of me in as many ways as possible? So not only making those cloves, but if it's, at the top of the scapes as they're unfurling and making those bulbils, sometimes, especially with soft neck varieties, that happens in the stem as well. And so those are totally little just chunks of garlic. They're generally a total pain. I mean, it's food. We're so lucky. This is the greenest, most delicious planet I've ever been on. And if I were starving, I would so gratefully unwrap all of those little bulbils. But they're really small generally, and they're like shrink wrapped. So they're a lot of work to peel and then so I generally don't do anything with them. But they're totally edible. And with those bulbils too, and this is a little thing that I share in the Garlic and Shallot Academy, which I can't recommend highly enough jumping on because there's so many more details to share. But those bulbils, if you do want to save them, you can plant them super close, like 1 inch away from each other. And then in the spring, eat them like green garlic. Eat them just their leaves. They won't form a significant bulb or clove, nothing in the ground that is exciting to pull out. But you can honestly eat garlic leaves. They're delicious. They taste like, yeah, garlic, you guessed it. So with those bulbils, I like to collect them and then just plant them super densely, like 1 inch away from each other, just solid in a bed. And so then all spring I have green garlic that I can just harvest and, throw in frittatas, toss them with eggs. I put them in salad dressings crushed. So they're really versatile.
Another question. Linda says she got a bag of culinary garlic from you and it too look like a single round piece. What type may this be? Just looks a bit odd.
I don't know offhand. Yeah, I'm not sure, but there's certainly a reason that it was culinary garlic. And so sometimes, once in a while, hardnecks, instead of differentiating, they might differentiate into 2, or sometimes it's just that one clove that we planted, that one clove got larger. And so we're like, well, I don't know why that garlic is doing that. We certainly don't want to plant it because we don't want to do it again. But we can totally eat it. And so we do. And so, yeah, we shared culinary garlic with some folks with people this year. You're one of the lucky ones that got some of it, my friend. But yeah, so that's my guess of what happened. But honestly, I'm not entirely sure, and we don't often see it, but because we grow, this last year we had about 12,000 bulbs of garlic and shallots. So we had, a few dozen of those, which was really interesting. But yeah, we just don't want to save that seed. So we eat it, and now you will, and enjoy.
Chris says, is there any advantage to sprouting the garlic cloves before planting them? He's tried and without sprouting. I've tried with and without sprouting and I haven't seen any difference, he says.
I've never done that. So, but I would not bother sprouting it at all. I would just plant the clove straight in. And I mean, and garlic is included. Seeds in general, they actually, like, imagine a bona fide seed, which this is technically not botanically garlic isn't a seed. But like imagine a sunflower seed, like a hard shell. The root is what comes out first, and then the shoots emerge. If it's not in soil though, it's kind of stressed and and it hedges its bets and will sprout. I highly recommend just not even trying to sprout them first and just planting it straight in the ground. And yeah, I think you'll have much more effective garlic growing for you, my friend. So yeah, this is so much fun.
The last thing isn't a question, but Robert says that the bulb bells are very good in a soup or a stew.
Yes, totally. They're delicious. Yeah. And I realize bulbil is spelled Bulbil. But they are kind of like little bells. So now let's talk about mulching, to mulch or not to mulch. So yeah, there's to mulch or not to mulch. Mostly just mulch. And you can mulch with lots of different things. I highly recommend mulching because it just makes your garlic that much more tenacious, and you don't have to weed as much. It will take the soil longer to warm up in the spring, but it also, you won't have the frost heaving of the freeze thaw cycles as dramatically affecting and raising the clove to the surface, right? I mean, just like, let's talk about those dynamics for just a moment. How many of you have rocks in your garden and notice that there's more rocks every year, even though you've picked all the rocks last year, but more keep coming? And that's because the cold, the freeze thaw, that like freeze thaw, the constriction of that water, the water in your soil actually brings denser materials up to the surface. And so that's why the rocks just keep coming, and your garlic could be included. And so if you can reduce the freeze thaw with the mulch, you're going to have less issues with your garlic coming up to the top and risking desiccation. And you can use any number of things for mulch. We get great big used moldy round bales of alfalfa. Alfalfa, because it just has a lot more nutrients. Granted, alfalfa, it breaks down more quickly, so we have to be adding more to have it be a solid mulch. If you have something like straw, amazing. That breaks down a lot less quickly. It also doesn't have the nutrient density, but then you have to be mulching less. So it's kind of a balance between, and honestly, this year we're putting on 3 inches of the alfalfa mulch, and then we're putting on 3 inches of the straw. So we're kind of getting the best of both worlds. Other great mulching options: deciduous leaves are your friend. So deciduous leaves are amazing, and put them through a chipper shredder is the dream, because that way they're already broken down more. Sometimes, especially those like big flat leaves, that they can kind of become a mat in the winter time, that then as the cloves are emerging up through, the shoots are emerging up through, they can sometimes struggle. So I highly recommend putting any of your deciduous leaves through a chipper shredder first. But that honestly is the very best mulch possibly on the planet. I mean, our deciduous forests here in the Northeast, that's why we have some of the richest soils honestly on the planet, because all of these trees are bringing all these nutrients up from the subsoil every year and then dropping them again so that they're available on the surface to build soils, to make plants grow. So yes, deciduous leaves are amazing.
We have some, I'm sorry, we have some mulch questions. One person's wondering if seaweeds are okay to use as mulch. Another is asking about salt marsh hay. And another is curious, are there leaves you need to avoid, like they have a Norwegian maple? Sorry.
Yeah, so I definitely, wonderful questions. Seaweed is phenomenal mulch. You do want to rinse it really well because those additional salts can be really problematic, but just rinse it well and that is incredible. When I lived in Maine, seaweed was totally a thing for mulch and it was amazing. Use what you've got for sure. Salt marsh hay, honestly, that's a wonderful question and I've never actually, I don't know anything about it. I've never thought about it. So I don't know, but I would do maybe a little test plot if that's something you have locally abundant. Just before you commit to your whole garden mulching with it, mulch with just a little bit. And I think that's a great option too. And your other question, yes, Norway maples, awesome, amazing. The only deciduous leaves that you don't want to use are black walnut leaves. So black walnut leaves, anything about the black walnut is just full of this compound called jugalone that's vastly allelopathic. And so it literally has compounds that is just like not allowing other plants to grow. It's amazing. I mean, it's a brilliant evolutionary strategy, but not ideal for growing gardens. So yeah, any other so avoid anything coniferous, any of your, any evergreens, avoid holly leaves, those great big waxy cuticles, and avoid black walnuts. But honestly, any other deciduous leaf, you're good to go. And yeah, I can't wait for you to suddenly you'll be like, wow, all these people are giving away their glorious nutrition. They've already bagged it for me. They've put it on the side of the road for me. How thoughtful of them. Yes, now you know this is like some of the very best ways. And certainly throw them on your compost pile. Those deciduous leaves are just some of the best things that you can put on your garden. And certainly for mulching garlic, it's a dream.
Robert says that some hays are sprayed with herbicides. Is that an issue?
Yes, totally. So I would definitely get organic hay anytime you can. Straw is generally less of an issue, but anytime you can get organic, just get organic. Not only because there's chemicals that may be on that plant, residual, but also it's just like support those who support you. And if you're supporting organic farmers in any way rather than conventional farmers, it's just the world is winning. And certainly our great grandchildren are, of all species. Any other questions about mulching, my friends? And if not, I'll dive into weeding and feeding. So the weeding aspect, we kind of already touched on, as well as feeding in terms of mulch. With weeding, I don't love to weed, and that's where mulching is just genius. And so honestly, if you throw 6 inches of mulch on your garlic in the fall, you're doing great. And you're still going to need to additionally put straw, mulch, something else on in the spring, because that mulch, think of your compost pile, right? You have all of this material and it's compounding. And so over time you put on all this material and you get this much compost. So essentially your mulch is going to compost in place, which is the great news because it's actually feeding your garlic But it's also true that that is going to make it that much easier for weed seeds to pop up through that mulch. And so if you can basically always have 6 inches of mulch on your garlic, you're going to weed very little. And the thing is too, once you start mulching and committing to mulch, you've committed to hand weeding. There's no way, you can't get a hoe into that garlic. So you're committing to pulling every single weed by hand. So just be sure that when it's spring and you are jumping back in to, your gardens, just keep throwing mulch on. And that way your garlic will be, you're retaining moisture, retaining nutrients, and you're suppressing weeds. So it's hard to go wrong. Just get lots of more early and often is a really solid policy for mulch. And for feeding, garlic is super hungry. And so yes, this garlic and shallot fertilizer is so critical. And compost, you can also put mulching with compost is totally an option. And also in the spring, we start spraying dilute fish emulsion on all of our garlic every week, 10 days. And so this is a combination of both fish and kelp. And so it has really balanced NPK and is just beautifully going to promote just health across the board. And so it has over 100 micronutrients. And so it's just like, garlic is one of the heaviest feeding crops you'll ever grow in your garden. And so this is one of the things that can make such a big difference, and especially in spring. So here's a fun little notion. Soils in spring, cold soils, have a lot less nutrients bioavailable for plants than warm soils. So that same exact cup of soil at 40 degrees versus 65 degrees, there's literally more nutrients available to plants at 65 degrees compared to the 40 degrees. So garlic is growing super fast in the spring and is just going gangbusters, and you don't want to limit its growth. And that's when it's most bottlenecked because the soil is most cold. So that's where being able to spray foliar feed that, or even root drench with that fish emulsion, just suddenly transforms your plants and is like, oh yeah, I was hungry, but I'm not anymore. And it's, just really helps make sure that your plants are never hungry. And any questions in that feeding department, Stacy?
Yeah, Chris is curious what your thoughts on mushroom compost as a fertilizer are.
Ooh, yes. So my thoughts on mushroom compost. I have a lot to learn, but here is my general approach. I never recommend getting mushroom soil unless it's the very last thing that you have access to and you're desperate. And that's because unless it's certified organic, mushrooms are grown with a ton of chemicals. So that, think about it. They're growing mushrooms in soil. There's so many bacteria in soil, so many different mycelial strains, mushroom strains. And so it's like you have to seriously sterilize soil to grow conventional commercial mushrooms in them. So there's just a lot of chemicals in that soil. And it's just a byproduct. And that it's like one of those, the classic situation of like an industrial byproduct trying to be turned into a value added product. And so that's my general impression. I'm open to other thoughts if folks, if anyone has any different intel, but that's why I never recommend mushroom compost, mushroom soil, unless you really can't find anything else and are totally desperate.
Anne Marie is curious, can you spray the fish emulsion on top of the mulch?
So you can, rather than spraying fish emulsion on top of your mulch, you can root drench with fish emulsion as well. So with fish emulsion, you dilute it 1 ounce into 1 gallon of water, 1 ounce of fish emulsion into 1 gallon of water. And then you can either spray that on the leaves or you can root drench. So with that root drench, I would simply be pouring this right into my water. And then rather than foliar feeding it and spraying it, I would be pouring it right at the base of the garlic plant. So it's like coming right, just soaking right down into the roots. Maybe I'll soak a little water on myself while I'm here. So yeah, great question.
When in the spring do you start to feed kelp or seaweed?
We start to grow generally in April. So once the plants are about 6 inches tall. And so that's, early April, mid-April here in Zone 5. We're here in the Finger Lakes at Fruition Seeds. But honestly, once they're 6 inches tall, that's a good metric for wherever you find yourself in the world.
What brand of fish emulsion do you recommend?
So we get some from our friends in Maine, and so we have it on our website, fruitionseeds.com. But if you find other things like Neptune's Harvest is awesome, just make sure that, honestly, I think all of the products are pretty good as long as they're using bycatch. This isn't like people fishing and then turning it into fish emulsion. It's literally the waste stream. This is actually a industrial waste stream that is an awesome value-added product, unlike mushroom soil or compost, as the case they would love it to be, where this is like, imagine fishing boats, and all of that they're selling, marketing, is kind of the fillets of the flesh of the fish, but any of the eyeballs, internal organs, the bones, there's tons of nutrients there, but they're historically, and this is totally gross, just thrown right back into the ocean, which is actually really toxic. And so it's become this wonderful thing in the last few decades to turn that into fish emulsion, to just make it into this colloidal concentrated liquid, just packed full of nutrients. So I would recommend making sure that sometimes companies can dial in and have different NPK. So those 3 numbers, like it'll be like 3-1-1, and that'll be 3 parts nitrogen, 1 part phosphorus, 1 part potassium. So just keep an eye on that, because you want to have this. The reason we have like the fish and kelp emulsion is that it's much more balanced. There's more micronutrients, and it's 4-5-4. So it's really wonderful for like those fruiting and leafy crops. But it's great for roots. It's just good across the board, where if it's too much nitrogen, it's going to be too vegetative generally for plants, especially that's something like garlic that wants to be focusing its energy into a bulb below the ground.
I have an interesting question that is a little bit different. Are deer interested in eating garlic? Do I have to protect them throughout the winter?
And you don't generally have to protect garlic from deer. Not only because when you plant it late enough, the garlic barely emerges. Honestly, the deer will do more damage by like just walking through your garden, and especially if you just have open soil that isn't mulched, they're generally not going to damage the garlic. It's just kind of annoying to have all these holes in your bed from where their feet have, where they've walked. But yeah, generally highly sulfurous plants deer are not fond of. So of course I'd never make any guarantee with deer, because they're simply just ravenously hungry and incredibly different. Just everywhere. So I feel like it's a fool's mission to say something is totally deer resistant. But that being said, this garlic is going to be it's not going to be fenced. None of our garlic has ever been fenced over the winter, and they're just fine.
Petra, what are chips in the soil? Do they bother that?
Ooh, our internet connection wasn't great for a moment there. Could you repeat the question?
I know. It's my
Yeah, you too.
connection. It keeps going out. But how about the chipmunks underneath the soil?
Oh,
Can you
chipmunks.
hear me?
Yeah. I've never
Chipmunks.
had any issues with chipmunks as well. So actually our friend Sean Dombrowski, is brilliant. He's done in Ithaca, he's edible acres. And so if you're interested in like bushy perennials like currants and yasterberries, and you want to get goji berries that can grow here, and just other fun, amazing kind of perennial woody plants, including fruit trees and nut trees, Sean is an amazing resource. And he taught me years ago now that he actually, when he has his nut nurseries inside, interplanted in his garlic. So he's literally, that garlic, we plant it on a 6 to 8 inch grid. And in the middle of all of his bulbs, he's planting nuts, which are delicious to chipmunks and squirrels. And they sufficiently don't love those the garlic that they leave. That's literally his nut nursery of how he sprouts them with and gets them to leave him alone. So that being said, I've never actually done that myself. So I'm just giving you, sharing what Sean has done. So I do want to share that that's like secondhand information, but I wouldn't be too concerned about the chipmunks in conclusion.
Thank you.
Another question. Chris is wondering, is it okay to use diluted human urine as fertilizer?
I generally don't, because it's so nitrogen rich and there's also significant salts in there. But if you want to compost it, by all means, please don't hesitate. And whether it's, there's tons of awesome resources on composting human waste, whether it's liquid or solid. And there's tons of people who for generations have been dialing this in. So yeah, Google is definitely your friend. The Humanure Handbook is the first book that I ever got to dive into, and is still my go-to resource for that. The Humanure, as in human manure, the Humanure Handbook.
What pests should people be on the watch for?
Honestly, we don't have any pests on our garlic. And in fact, a lot of beneficial insects love to live on very sulfurous insects. So sometimes there will be like onion thrips that can hang out on garlic too. That can sometimes just look like these kind of, like, imagine frost on a window pane, just like this little etching into the leaf that kind of looks silvery. So that's what thrip damage often looks like. But it's really rare. Honestly, garlic is super easy to grow and is pretty disease free, with the exception of growing garlic in the same place year after year. There's some really big liabilities there.
I have some questions that I've been kind of waiting. But do you want me to go ahead and ask them? They're a little bit off topic. I don't know. One's about raised beds and the other one is about when you harvest in July.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, maybe let's talk about raised beds, and then I'll give kind of a cursory overview of what to expect in spring, and then harvesting and curing, knowing that all of these, are go into much greater detail in our Garlic Academy, that online course that is totally free on our website. So yeah, but let's talk about the raised bed question.
So Colleen says she has raised beds 4x8 and 15x16. She's very new to all of this. Is it appropriate to plant in raised beds?
Yeah, absolutely. So garlic loves to grow in raised beds. Containers are a different matter. And essentially, in a lot of ways, raised beds are kind of just large containers. That being said, there's plenty of soil, plenty of nutrients, and they're generally solid edges, so the desiccating winter winds don't dry out the cloves as much. So yeah, garlic and raised beds are perfect.
And the other question has to do with harvest. So Steve wants to know, do you recommend or not recommend washing off the dirt with water to get nice and clean bulbs for the next few weeks when they are drying? Or should you just brush dirt off as much as possible and let them dry that way?
Yeah, so two things. In the field, we actually go and harvest when we harvest these bulbs, and we're like, with you can pull them if you have 6 inches of mulch and they just pop right out. But otherwise you want to take a digging fork and gently lift them up, because otherwise the hard neck can actually dissociate, and that just means you have to eat them right away. They won't store. But then right in the field, generally there's soil on the roots. And so we'll go like this and get all that soil, leave that soil right in your garden. I mean, that soil has taken thousands of years to develop, right? So leave it there in your garden as often as possible. So after we shake out, as much as we possibly can, then we just dry it from there. And honestly, at that point in the drying, the curing process, that soil, most of it will just dry and then fall off. And then what doesn't fall off, then we clip the roots back and then it falls off. So yes, there's a cursory view of how we think about soil and leaving the most of it in the garden as much as possible.
We are all caught up with questions.
Amazing. So yeah, from here, I'll just give you a brief overview of what to anticipate in the spring. And with any luck in the spring, we'll find ourselves here again talking about what to do next. And so in the spring, the garlic regrows like first thing. And then it'll be green, it'll be snowing, snow will be accumulating on the leaves. Don't worry, don't think twice. Everything is fine. This has happened for millions of years, and garlic doesn't bat an eye. So garlic is incredibly cold hardy, and it will just continue to grow in the spring. And again, feeding it that fish emulsion, or if you have any other fertilizer or compost that you want to put on, amazing. And then you'll start to notice that in June, you'll start to get like leaf, and in the hard neck varieties produce a scape in the month of June. Soft neck varieties don't put out scapes, and scapes are delicious. They're essentially a seed stalk. Even though garlic doesn't make true seed, it makes these little lovely bulbils. So it sends up from this hard neck that you can still see in the middle here. And that hard neck will come up and curl, and they're delicious. I love to eat them any way you use garlic. The more young and tender they are, that's my favorite, before they really start to curl. There's some really interesting research that and it doesn't make any sense to me, but apparently in my mind, if you pull out that scape, that's a lot of energy that plant is putting into making a scape, right? And so it should then put that much more energy into making a bulb. There's no empirical proven evidence that this happens. Lots of tests have happened, and the bulbs doesn't seem to affect bulb size, which is amazing. So if you don't do it, it's not the end of the world. I always, regardless of bulb size being affected by it or not, that scape is just delicious. So I always harvest them. And you can make delicious pesto out of them. I also just send them through our Cuisinart, so there's lots of little coins, and then I saute them and then just throw them honestly I make a pate out of that. I also just put bags of them in the freezer to put in soups all winter long. So yeah, scapes are delicious. And it's about 1 month after the scape emerges that your garlic will be ready to harvest. And you'll know it's ready to harvest because 3 to 4 of your leaves will have dried down. And the lowermost leaves dry down first compared to the uppermost leaves. And each of those leaves above the ground corresponds to a wrapper below the ground. So that's where garlic, it's kind of wild. It goes into dormancy in the height of summer. So as those leaves are drying down and the corresponding wrappers below the ground are drying down, your plant is going into dormancy. And so once 3 to 4 leaves, about half of your leaves have dried down, at that point your garlic is ready to harvest. And if you have 6 inches of mulch, go ahead and simply just give it a pull. But if there's any resistance, come in with a fork, and you'll want to fork it up so that you're not, and think of yourself as harvesting an egg. That young garlic is super tender and will readily bruise. And so once you cure it beautifully, you can do a lot of things to it. And Much more tenacious. But before you cure it, it's much more sensitive. So think of yourselves as harvesting an egg, and then you'll want to cure it out of direct sun in a warm place, ideally in the 70s or 80s, not warmer than the 90s, not lower than 65, and then degrees Fahrenheit. And then you also want to have lots of airflow because you're essentially drying your garlic down. And moving air wicks moisture impressively well. Temperature is, like I mentioned, with the 90 degrees or above, you can actually fry the garlic. Like that apical bud down inside each clove will die. And so if you're just planning on eating it, I guess it's not the biggest deal. But certainly if you're planning on planting it, you want to be drying out those cloves with air moving rather than temperature. And so we have a barn that we put these in, that we have all of these great big fans just blowing. And it might take 3-4 weeks for us to cure a garlic, depending on the temperature, depending on the humidity, especially here in the Northeast. It can be really wet. So if it's really wet or cooler, it's going to take a lot longer for your garlic to cure. And you'll know it's cured when you're opening up that garlic bulb and it is totally dry inside and all of those wrappers are crispy. And if you see any amount of moisture inside, that it's just not totally cured yet. So there are a few things to keep in mind, friends. Those are the 7 steps to growing great garlic. And of course, there's so much more in our Garlic Academy, and I can't wait to share that with you too. But yeah, you had another question?
Can you recommend the best storage options?
Yeah, so if you're storing your garlic, you want to make sure that it's quite dry. And 0% moisture is also going to desiccate your garlic more quickly, but honestly, keep them in the driest place in your house and that will be perfectly marvelous. You also want to have it out of direct sunlight. Direct sunlight will spur that apical bud and encourage it to sprout. You want it to not sprout or even turn green. So, and then let's talk temperature, because if you're storing it long term, kind of in the mid 50s is pretty ideal. If it's a little above, it's not the worst issue, but it is going to not store as long if it's a warmer temperature. And yeah, so and again, that airflow is really critical. So yeah, this colander, awesome. There's those holes, increasing airflow. So even this on your kitchen counter is way better, honestly, than a lot of storage techniques. And if you have one of those kind of hanging mesh things that people often have in their kitchens, that's a perfect place to have your garlic be stored.
Linda has a tip and a question. So the tip is that scapes store in a fridge for a long time too. And the question is, can I reuse a bed after a year or two of not planting garlic? Also, can I plant my shallots in the garlic bed from last year?
Yeah, so I would leave at least 4 years in between your garlic, which I know can be really challenging, especially in small gardens. And your shallots are not necessarily going to get any potential diseases that the garlic would get, but they do need essentially the same nutrition. And so the main reason that I would recommend you not grow the shallots in that same bed as your garlic is that they're needing that same nutrients. And so yes, you can put down more fertilizer, more compost, but it's just a good idea to rotate crops in that way too, because even though a tomato is a heavy feeder as well, it's taking out different nutrients than the garlic. So you'll probably have happier, healthier, more productive, abundant shallots if you plant the shallots, not where your garlic had just come out.
Well, that wraps up all of our questions, and I'm looking at this beautiful scene and I'm noticing that it looks like a storm might be headed your way.
There's some big dramatic clouds.
So, one more just popped up. What would you grow in the beds during the non-garlic years?
Ooh, anything. Potatoes, tomatoes, lots of greens, okra. Oh my gosh, what is not there to grow? So literally, but not anything that you want to kind of rotate by families. So things that are in that same allium family are things like onions and leeks. You want to avoid planting anything in that allium family. So honestly, broccoli, great choice. Anything that's not an onion, anything else in that allium family is a great choice. So luckily, the world is your oyster, and grow beets, grow more carrots. So thank you all for joining, and thank you again, Stacy and Alexis and all the greater Rochester area libraries for being so visionary and making this possible. And Stacy, thank you so much for facilitating all of those questions. It was such a joy to join you all. Curious gardeners are the best gardeners. And yeah,
Thank you.
stay tuned.
Thank you.
My huge pleasure. Thank you.
Is there time for one quick last question that just popped up?
Oh, of course.
What about what to grow when garlic has been harvested? There's still some good growing time available.
Yes, perfect, wonderful question. So you've harvested your garlic and it's, the end of July, and there is so much you can grow. So you basically have at least maybe even 3 months until frost here in zone 5. So you can plant anything that's going to mature in solidly 60, even 70, 80 days. And so honestly, that's a lot of things. You can plant fall broccoli, you can plant carrots, beets, you can plant all kinds of greens for fall. You can plant dwarf peas, is the perfect window. Cauliflower, fall cabbage. Just take a look at that maturity, and if you have less than 60 days to call it safe, certainly 50 days easy, then you will have this amazing opportunity to have tons of greens. And take a look at we have a whole succession sowing chart. I do have it. Yes, so check it out. This is part of our Across the Seasons Perpetual calendar, and and it's in two. Perhaps you've seen our Rise and Shine, Starting Seeds with Ease, and this is all about seed starting. And we have this whole planting calendar so that you can see, like, here are all these different crop types, and here's January through December, and there's lots of different colors for direct sow, for transplant, for all the different timing, when to expect to sow, to harvest. So it's kind of a baby encyclopedia. And in all of our orders, we actually put in, basically, it's a postcard of this as well. And there's lots of other, I wanted to show you too, this Across the Seasons calendar. We throw in lots of great things. So it's not a year-to-year calendar, it's a perennial, perpetual calendar. So it has all the dates, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but instead of Monday through Sunday, it has years. So here's 2020, and you can just, write in whichever year you happen to be in. And so you can see here in September, I put in when Late Blight arrived in New York State, and when we direct sowed mosh and cilantro and claytonia and spinach. And so I'll be filling this in throughout the months. And so I'll write in, when I plant my garlic. And if we go back to July, it'll say, oh yes, this is when we planted or harvested the garlic. So just all kinds of great info. And so then you can see, across the seasons, which is why we called it Across the Seasons, those emergent patterns. And, I also put in things like, the cicadas are singing again, and the Blackburnian warblers have returned, and all kinds of great info that to me relates to gardening and life, as well as birthdays of amazing humans like Wangari Maathai and Aretha Franklin and all our friends as well. There's lots of great tools to help you know what to sow and when. But you've got, when you're taking out your garlic at the end of July, you've got a long season ahead and much abundance yet to come. Just be sure that you're sowing seeds when you've planted. Like, add lots of extra compost, other fertilizers you can find, like our granular fertilizer. Just be sure that our culture, we like to receive and then we think we can give. I'm working on this too. So just in our gardens, let's feed the soil before we expect to be harvesting anything. So because especially garlic is such a heavy feeder, be sure you're putting on extra compost and any other fertility before you plant your next crop.
2 more questions and then that's really it. One is, if I purchase garlic now, can I hold on to it and plant it in November after my fall garden is diminishing?
Totally. Yeah, so absolutely. Honestly, and you can plant garlic up until the moment that a trowel cannot go into the earth to pull it back so that you can plant your garlic. Garlic is incredibly tenacious, and you are what you eat. So eat lots of garlic, and we generally, because we are planting just such huge quantities of garlic and we want to prep the beds well ahead of time, that's where, and we plant at the end of September, that's where we've been prepping this ground for a few weeks. But yeah, there's no reason not to let all of your carrots, all of your collards, your kale get as sweet as can be, and then just plant your garlic after it's frosted a ton and it's even starting to snow. It's not too late.
The final question, what is Caledonia?
Ooh, Claytonia. It's kind of my favorite salad green of all time. And we're just doing the germination testing on it now. So it's not on our website yet, but it will hopefully in a few weeks. And it's native, and it's delicious. It tastes like bright, succulent spinach. And it's incredibly cold hardy, just like spinach is. So literally you can plant it now through early October, and it'll be growing abundantly all through May when it'll finally go to seed. You can even harvest it in the winter. It's amazing. And so it's just kind of this short little green, and stay tuned, I'm about to share a lot more about it. But it's this short little green with heart-shaped leaves that just, the stems and the leaves, everything about this plant is just beautiful emerald green and just bright and succulent and wonderful. So yeah, Claytonia, Claytonia, Claytonia. I can't wait to share some seeds with you.
Well, thank you, Petra. I think we've answered every last question.
It's a miracle. Well, don't be shy. Curious gardeners are the best gardeners. And
Yes.
I hope this is, not the last time that we talk about garlic and gardening. And so whether it's on Facebook, on Instagram, whether it's, we send out a beautiful organic gardening email each week where I share a video tutorial and seasonal info, whether it's showing up here on the farm post-pandemic, we will begin our on-farm tours and events again. At the end of August, we always have a watermelon party because we grow literally hundreds of organic watermelons every year just for the certified organic seed inside. So we have a great big party and we all just eat watermelon, and it's been hard to eat out watermelon this year without everyone. So hopefully this will be the only year that we will not be celebrating watermelon with our watermelon party. But your cordial invitation to come visit the farm post-pandemic. And if you're local too, we do have a free shipping promo code for locals, and we have a beautiful new curbside pickup kiosk with lots of lovely little mailboxes that Daryl Abraham is painting as we speak. So so you can go pick up right here at the farm, which is really fun after you online order. But there's so many ways to stay in touch, and I hope that you do, and don't be shy. I love sharing what I love with people I care about. So thanks again, Stacy and Alexis, and thank you all for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh, thank you. That's
Bye.
great.
Bye. Have a nice
Till next time.
Get your garlic going.